Hey. Good. I'm a little frazzled. Are Ben and Gavin going to be up here?
Yeah.
Do we need a third chair?
Yeah, I think they should be up here.
Don't do that.
Hey, are you on Wi-Fi?
Please don't do that.
Are you on Wi-Fi connected? Huh? Yeah, it seems to be making things get sketchy. I think so. I'm on now. Okay, I still see you're just a black screen. Are you? Okay, I'm gonna have to shut my phone off. Okay, there you go. Now you're gone. Yeah. Yeah,
Is this okay? Because we have two speakers.
Is there any way you could text me the lead up? For some reason, I had to go through our church website. You know how it is. Yeah, I can email. Yeah, I can send you the email. Thank you. That would be helpful.
It's going to be a really small crowd at this first. Yeah. So, you guys want to sit on the stage? That's what you guys okay. Yeah.
It's just crazy.
Right. I got it.
All right.
I just grabbed
Yeah,
it.
let's
Good morning, and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Spokane, where our mission is to join together to create a nourishing, liberal religious home and to champion justice, diversity, and environmental stewardship in our wider world, or, as we say in short, to create community, find meaning, and work for justice. We're glad to have you with us. UUCS is a welcoming congregation, and we appreciate your unique experiences, backgrounds, beliefs, and lifestyle. If you're one of our longtime members or have been here just a short time, or if you're with us here today for the very first time, we are very glad to have you with us. And we are also grateful for those who are streaming in to this service today. They're usually up there. We're delighted to have you with us. If anybody wants to say a word of hello or introduction.
We have a relatively smaller group today, but most enthusiastic to hear about the service. Some of our colleagues can say hello.
Yeah, great.
Anyone? Okay, I guess we're just anticipating the service.
Well, we're happy to have you here. And it's also my pleasure to welcome our guest speakers this morning. Ben Stuckart and Gavin Cooley are joining us today to discuss homelessness in Spokane, and I'll introduce them in more detail in just a bit. And welcome to everyone. Now please take a few moments to greet one another and be sure to say hello to someone that you haven't met, if there is anyone you haven't met.
Today, our coffee guy and tea guy back over by the kitchen, Alan, is having a birthday today. Would you help me sing to him? Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Alan. Happy birthday to you.
Thank you. Happy birthday, Alan.
Coffee for us, so we have to sing happy
Yeah.
Essential work.
I should mention, after our second service today, Ben and Gavin will be joining a panel discussion and lunch organized by our Social Justice Coordinating Council. And in addition to Ben and Gavin, the panel will include one or two formerly homeless women from Transitions and a representative from Compassionate Addiction Treatment. We now turn from our informal greeting of one another to formally begin our service by lighting our chalice, the symbol of Unitarian Universalism, the symbol of our unity and solidarity, of our openness and inclusion, of our community and individual uniqueness. May the small flame be our offering of warmth to those who are cold and alone, and a light to those in darkness. May it be a flame that ignites justice in our world and a beacon of hope to those in need. And may it reflect at least a spark of truth wherever truth has been lost, and cast a healthy shadow of doubt wherever it has been found. Our opening reflection today is from Dean Koontz, of all people. All human lives are so profoundly and intricately entwined, those dead, those living, those generations yet to come, that the fate of all is the fate of each, and the hope of humanity rests in every heart and in every pair of hands.
Our first in-service hymn of the morning is Wake Now My Senses, 298. You, of course, can access the screen, or it's in the gray hymnal. We are singing verses 1, 3, and 5 today. Would you stand, please? Wake now my senses and hear the earth call. Feel the deep power of being in all. Keep with the web of creation your vow, giving, receiving as love shows us how. Wake now compassion, give heed to the cry. Voices of suffering fill the wide sky. Dig as your neighbor, both stranger and friend, praying and striving their hardship to end. Wake now my vision of ministry clear. Brighten my pathway with radiance here. Mingle my calling with all who will share. Work toward a planet transformed by our care.
We will now kindle our candles of care. Each time we gather as a congregation, there are always those with us in our minds and hearts, and who we want to wrap in our love and care. Let us share a moment in silence, embracing others who are here and here in our hearts and minds this morning. You are welcome to say their names aloud as you are willing. Those named aloud and those embraced in our silence, and all those who are suffering elsewhere in our world at this hour, we hold in our community of compassion. We now gratefully give and receive this morning's offering, which sustains this community and its mission to the larger world.
Aren't we lucky to have a pianist like Maura play beautiful Liszt songs for us as the offertory? Thank you. Well, this morning's Time for All Ages is inspired by an ancient epic poem called The Conference of the Birds. There may be a slide with pictures coming. I didn't check with Todd. Oh, there we go. A little visual for you. The Conference of the Birds. Once upon a time, all the birds in the land decided that they needed a leader for their community. A leader, they thought, would make their community stronger. Representatives of all the bird species gathered together to discuss finding their leader. A leader will tell us the right things to do, said the robin. Our leader must be wise, said the owl. A leader must believe we are each important, big and small, said the sparrow. I want the leader to be caring, like a friend, said the dove. Yes, the leader should help us share and get along better, said the jay. The leader must make us feel safe, said the hawk. I know where you can find such a leader, said the hoopoe bird. It is the simorg, and it lives far from here. The birds were very excited. They said they were willing to go anywhere to find such a leader. It might be dangerous, said the hoopoe. A few birds looked troubled, but all the birds voted to go find the simorg. The hoopoe took off, and all the birds followed. They flew at night. They flew in sunshine. Days and days passed. Some birds got tired and left the group. Other birds were filled with doubt. How did they know the simorg really existed? Only the hoopoe had ever heard of this bird. Some of the doubters dropped out, but others kept flying. One valley was filled with fiery mountains. All the birds were afraid. I'm too small to make it over that mountain, lamented the sparrow. No, keep flying. We can make it together. We will help you. And they did. The strong flyers helped the weak flyers. The birds with good vision helped find food for the group. Along the journey, the birds learned how to better respect, share, and care for each other. It seemed that every bird had something special and unique to offer that made the journey easier. Finally, the hoopoe announced, "We are here!" The other birds looked around in anticipation. "But where's the simorg? I don't see it," they cried. "Come, it's over here," said the hoopoe. The birds stood beside the hoopoe and realized they were on the edge of a lake. They looked in and saw their own reflections, and then they understood. The simorg was not another bird. The simorg was all of them, and all of them were the simorg. They remembered that each of them had something good and strong and special inside of them, and that each bird had gifts to bring to the community. They were all that was needed to keep their community strong. They knew now that together they could do anything.
As we move into a time of meditation, find a comfortable position, close your eyes if you wish, take a deep breath in, breathe out. Through it all, we attempt to bring balance to the present moment, understanding that in patience lies wisdom, knowing that what will come next will be determined in large measure by how we are now. This is helpful to keep in mind when we get impatient in our meditation, or when we get frustrated, impatient, and angry in our lives. Lao Tzu in the Tao Te Ching asks this of us: do you have the patience to wait till your mud settles and the water is clear? Can you remain unmoving till the right action arises by itself? Our reading this morning is titled Just Listen by Rachel Noemi Remen. I suspect that the most basic and powerful way to connect with another person is to listen. Just listen. Perhaps the most important thing we ever give each other is our attention, and especially if it's given from the heart. When people are talking, there's no need to do anything but receive them. Just take them in. Listen to what they're saying. Care about it. Most times, caring about it is even more important than understanding it. Most of us don't value ourselves or our love enough to know this. It has taken me a long time to believe in the power of simply saying, "I'm sorry," when someone is in pain, and meaning it. One of my patients told me that when she tried to tell her story, people often interrupted her to tell her that they once had something just like that happen to them. Suddenly, her pain became a story about themselves. Eventually, she stopped talking to most people. It was just too lonely. We connect through listening. When we interrupt what someone is saying to them, to let them know that we understand, we move the focus of attention to ourselves. When we listen, they know we care. I have even learned to respond to someone crying by just listening. In the old days, I used to reach for the tissues until I realized that passing a person a tissue may be just another way to shut them down, to take them out of their experience of sadness and grief. Now, I just listen. When they have cried all they need to cry, they find me there with them. The sermon today is titled Homelessness, Regional Solutions, Housing, and Help. Our guest speakers are Ben Stuckart and Gavin Cooley. We are really lucky to have him here. Ben Stuckart was born and raised in Spokane. He has 2 degrees from Eastern Washington University. He served as the City Council President from 2012 to 2019. He is currently the Executive Director of the Spokane Low-Income Housing Consortium. He and Gavin Cooley helped create Housing and Help, which I've seen every episode of, a web series of documentaries seeking proven solutions to end the homelessness crisis. And I do recommend it. It's really great. It's about homelessness and specifically about homelessness here in Spokane. So that's again called Housing and Help. You can, if you're a podcast listener, you can also subscribe to it as a podcast. Gavin Cooley served for 18 years as the Chief Financial Officer for the City of Spokane. He worked for 6 Spokane mayors and is currently spending his time convincing folks to get together and solve homelessness. So please join me in welcoming Ben Stuckart and Gavin Cooley.
Good morning. Thank you for having us here today. My name is Ben. I think grounding stories are really important, and I was going to tell a story about myself, but Lao Tzu and patience, I think, is really germane to this story, but also to me. And if you look outside and it's snowing and it's really cold, and there are thousands of individuals living on the street right now, and last night my wife and I were downtown, and there were, everywhere you went, on every block, there were people living in cupboards, and I think that makes me really impatient. But I've had a patience problem my entire life, and so I go way too fast and get ahead of myself. And I learned over the last few years that if you wait for things to bubble up, like the quote said, that things take place a lot better when they happen when they're supposed to. So I was 25 and I was living in the Bay Area, and it was really crowded and a lot more people than I was used to growing up in Spokane. And I'd get frustrated at the cars and the traffic, and you'd be in a lot of traffic jams. Taking anywhere, Spokane is 10 minutes to anywhere in town. There it's a half an hour anywhere in town. And I was having a really frustrating afternoon, and I was driving, and it was a nice day out, and my windows were down, and I was caught on a little business street district, and I found myself cursing and screaming at the cars in front of me, and it was a dead stop, and a car had pulled up next to me, and they had a bullhorn on top of their car, and they stopped right here, and my window was open, and then they just started saying patience over and over and over. And so I've thought for the last 25 years, like, that's my biggest lesson I need to learn. Because if you get out ahead of yourself, things don't happen. So I just wanted to tell that story on my own, how that matches. I was raised in a Catholic church at St. Anne's, which is a follower of, back then in the 80s, they were liberation theologists. And we had a family of El Salvadorian refugees that came and lived in our basement of our church. But the most memorable thing I remember from growing up in the church is one Sunday a sermon, and they put up on the screen, and they showed Fairchild Air Force Base, and then they showed what would happen if a nuclear bomb would be dropped off at Fairchild Air Force Base, and the sermon was all about what happens if nuclear war happens, and this is part of where we live. And then the next Sunday, when we were doing the prayers of the faithful, and it's you pray for people, they started praying for everybody that from our church, our community, had gone and climbed the fences out at Fairchild and been arrested. And there were like a dozen people in jail that next Sunday from breaking the law and trying to protest the nuclear bombs. And so to me, that's justice, and that's like living action in a community that says this is how we live. So those are just some grounding points before we get into homelessness on like my faith background and my biggest lessons I still need to learn, which that was a great quote.
Well, one of the favorite moments in my background is meeting my wife, Katie, and it was here at a wedding. And so I have really fond memories of this building. Which is where that began. But I grew up in Spokane also. I love Ben's description because I find him to be a really great balance of impatience and action. And I think a little bit of impatience is a great thing because it does press things forward. But Shane's Lao Tzu comment really resonated for me also because that idea of the mud settling in the water, I think we've been seeing this happening with homelessness to the point where it's kind of evolved very slowly. And I think we were all surprised maybe 10 years ago when we would see signs of it, and especially people my age that grew up in Spokane, like you're almost querying yourself and saying, I don't remember this growing up. I don't remember anything like this growing up. And then, of course, it just kept going. And as it kept going, it's almost like that mud settling. As it's gotten so out of hand that I think the mud has settled, and we're at this point of clarity where we absolutely know that it is the time for action. But we've been watching that settle, and we've been kind of thinking about it and ruminating about it. And I think there is this moment of clarity that we're in right now, which regrettably is this long period of, where we see people suffering on the streets and us trying to get our heads around it as a community. But I think it feels really good to be at that point. But I did likewise grow up Catholic, and my mother took us at some point. She decided that the formation of the Mass at St. Al's, where Ben was exactly what she liked. So she scooped us all up, and we stopped going to the cathedral, and we went to St. Anne's during the guitar mass period, which was this kind of exuberant period in the Catholic Church. So we were at St. Anne's for probably about 8 years also. And so we have that shared background, although I'm older than Ben, so I did not see him there. But I have 8 children, and I've raised them here. The last one is still at home. He's just turning 14, and he's 6'7". So things evolve strangely in your life. All the other ones were quite normal size, but now I talk to my last one like this. It's a strange form of parenting. But really glad to be here today to talk about this really important topic and to have this invitation. So thank you very much, Todd.
So Shane mentioned it, but we produced a 5-part series. The episodes range from about 20 minutes long to half an hour long, and it's called Housing and Help. And I was on the city council for, I think, 8 years and got the chance to work with Gavin. And in 2019, I ran for office again, and the whole election turned into a homelessness discussion in our community. And when I lost, I was really frustrated and came up with this idea that it was really easy to other people. And by other people, there's like an example, there's an article in the Inlander last week about the library downtown. And even the language in the article talks about it'll be one sentence where it'll say there's more homeless in our libraries. And then in the next sentence, they'll say, and violence has increased, and you're drawing your own inferences between that. But then later they do say, well, the violence isn't being caused by the homeless individuals, but the implication is clear. And in the article, at the end of the article, they actually say, in 2019, during the election season, there was a whole discussion about banning homeless individuals from our public libraries. And it was in a news cycle, and there were articles written about it. And the implication in this article just last week is should we be reconsidering banning people that are members of our community from other spaces? And so I came out of 2019 really frustrated and angry that somebody had been elected that really didn't believe in taking care of individual members of our community. And so my initial reaction was to write down that we need to do a PR campaign, because one of the things I think people don't do a good enough job is educating the public on why there's homelessness, humanizing those homeless members and houseless members of our community, and then actually looking at across the country what the solutions are. But I did practice patience in this time and spent about 2 years mulling that over in my head until I was ready to communicate what I wanted. The water's cleared, and then we were able to raise $200,000 for this PR project. And it's really weird talking about a PR project or something, but if you do it right and the waters are clear, you can help educate people and change people's minds. And so the goal was really, we sat down on day one and really said, who is one of the most trusted people in our community that works and makes things not political, and that's Gavin. Because Gavin has worked for 3 Republican mayors, 3 Democrat mayors, has no problem working with people of all political stripes, and is a trusted individual. And so we brought him on board, and then we had a series of conversations, and those conversations really focused on how do we humanize those members of our community and not allow them to be othered and not allow And how do we solve it? Like, how do we take it so there are less people living on our streets? And so I think that's really the progression we wanted to talk about, and then what we found. And then do you want to talk a little bit about what this series is?
Yeah, and that invitation from Ben, which for me I'm really thankful for, because I wouldn't be in this conversation at all if it wasn't for Ben reaching out to me. And I was really uncomfortable saying yes to it, because I had no grounding or subject matter expertise in homelessness other than what we're all feeling as a community. And Ben convinced me, well, you'll learn it along with the audience, which is kind of the whole point. And so I thought, well, okay. And, the first part of the series was very much about just identifying what we're seeing here in Spokane, visiting Camp Hope, visiting, with individuals experiencing homelessness, having conversations about how homelessness has evolved in Spokane in recent years, and really locally focused. But then we planned this trip down to Houston, and the trip to Houston was just fundamentally about numbers. They are the fourth largest community in the country, largest metropolitan area, number 4, and they've decreased homelessness by around 65% at this point over the last approximate 10 years. No other large metropolitan area has done that in America, and so it just made sense to go to Houston and say, how have you accomplished that? And, communities often do that. When somebody else is doing something, you go kind of explore it. And there are huge differences between Houston and Spokane, so it's kind of about seeing the opportunities that Houston saw, how they did it, and likewise avoiding the things they did wrong. And they were really willing to share those things also, but certainly wanting to find our own way towards reducing homelessness in a really meaningful manner like they have done in Houston. And that's what we discovered. And for me, that became a place where suddenly I was in, we'd be interviewing their 3-term mayor, Anise Parker, or other politicians, or people running organizations, or this whole system. And it is a whole system, a very integrated system, working together to accomplish the outcomes that they've come up with. That was very much, I was now at home. That's something I've been doing at the city for 18 years. And so that really, for me, the vision of coming back to Spokane and realizing the tools that we had here in Spokane, recognizing the opportunity and the mechanisms, just because, Ben and I both had done that for so long together, became very clear that it would have to step beyond the video series, which was just information and getting it out to people, but also saying, wow, we actually, because of our past together, have this opportunity to go back to that old, those mechanisms and that way, those ways of doing things, the relationships that we had, and start to pull together an approach to homelessness in Spokane that could result in the same sorts of outcomes. So that's really where we are right now, and that brings us to current. So I'll slide back to Ben then.
So Gavin mentioned Houston and going to Houston and what we learned, and I think there's 2 big things that we can take away from homelessness in any community that can be replicated elsewhere. So the first is, in Spokane right now, if you're an agency, say you're Catholic Charities and serving homeless individuals on our street, or Family Promise, or Volunteers of America, or Transitions, the funding you get to serve those houseless individuals in our community comes from 8 different sources. It comes from either the federal government, the state government, the City of Spokane, the County of Spokane, the Continuum of Care, which is HUD dollars that are transferred through a separate board. And then you have the business community that wants to be involved and spends money on it. And then you have philanthropy, places like Innovia Foundation, Empire Health Foundation, Smith Barbieri Progressive Fund. And I guess that's 7. There's an 8th somewhere in there, because I think the city has actually 2 different boards that decide where that money goes. None of that is coordinated, and none of that has a central driving process or plan. Last year, just a quick example, last year, there's no organization in town. If you ask the agencies that are serving houseless individuals, there's no HUD plan that exists. There's the city's coordinated plan. None of them will line up And none of them talk about building a huge 350-person warehouse that has porta potties outside, that the cost is $8 million this year alone. And those $8 million, they didn't know how to pay for it, so they paid for it out of money they got from the feds for COVID this year. And next year, that's automatically carried over as an $8 million deficit. And if we think about, but that's 350 people in one space. And if you think about that, that doesn't really work for somebody that has mental illnesses or has substance abuse problems or has had bad experiences. If you're an 18-year-old and recently homeless and you go into a crowded 350-person warehouse with a couple hundred other people, there's a lot of social hierarchies that happen and things don't work well when you put 350 people. But that plan, that came out of one person's head, and they spent $8 million on it, and it coordinates to nothing else in the system. In Houston, 11 years ago, they got on, HUD said, you guys are failing. They were on the same trajectory we are, which our homelessness in Spokane has increased by 66%. So if you look at Spokane increasing, and then you look and cross that over with what Houston's done, it's the direct opposite. And what they said was, first of all, before we do anything, we need to centralize everything so that you have one community plan and one agency that's funding all of those services. So you can first start by coordinating your services. And that's the first step we need to take in Spokane. The second step is they came up with a community plan. And you'd be surprised to learn that the solution to houseless individuals in your community, the best solution, is housing them. It sounds revolutionary, doesn't it? But you put people in housing. Houston has built 8,000 units of permanent supportive housing over the last 11 years, and they have housed 24,000 people. And so that means that you also have to have a healthy housing market, because if somebody goes into permanent supportive housing and gets services, and those services can be case management, those could be mental health professionals, those could be a psychiatrist that's prescribing drugs, that can be substance abuse, peer support. All of those services are offered in the housing in Houston, and that's why the series is called Housing and Help. Because when we talk nationwide, the buzzword is, it's called housing first. And that's the federal policy, and what that really means, though, isn't just housing. It's housing and help, whatever help you need. And you need to provide proper levels of housing. But when they did that, and somebody stabilized, and 80% of people in Houston, when they're offered the proper services inside of housing, stabilize within 5 years. And then they move on to independent living in market rate housing. So if you have a situation where your rents are skyrocketing like Spokane, and your home prices are skyrocketing like they are, and then you don't offer proper services inside of housing, and in Spokane's case we have a complete lack of housing, then the system stagnates. And what Houston found is if you create a healthy continuum of care for people, it actually can house 24,000 people over that. Our goal is, so they had 8,900 people that were homeless according to their one-time count. Our one-time count is a little over 2,000. So if you think about it, really the solution is building about 2,000 homes or apartments over the next 10 years. So that's about 200 a year. Right now we build about 50 a year. So quadrupling our production and then offering services inside those houses.
So it's been about a year since we were in Houston, and I can't think of a better metaphor for where we are now than this Journey of the Birds that Stephanie just read. And it began with, saying we need a new leader, the birds deciding they needed a new leader. We're definitely at the point where we know we need to do something remarkably different from what we've done in the past with regard to homelessness. It's not going away, and I think for a long time, people just thought, well, this is a temporary problem. And we know now that there's a lot of things happening in America. It's not Spokane by any stretch. Spokane is just like every other major community in America that has high housing prices. We're just like every other one. Every community with high housing prices, they have high housing prices because their economy is strong. And our poverty has been going down. The higher the poverty in a community, the lower the homelessness, which is one of those moments where you have to sit and think for a moment. But the reason when you have high poverty and there's low homelessness, the reason you have high poverty is there's not a good economy and there's not good jobs, and the cost of housing is remarkably cheap. So we don't have any of those. We have a strong economy, we have a low unemployment rate, we have a lot of things going right in Spokane. Things that as a CFO of the city for 18 years, I would have been very happy about. The population is growing at about double the rate it has over the long term. Median household income is growing way faster than it has for a long, long time. And so all of those is kind of that law of unexpected outcomes. You know, be careful what you wish for. The things that came with that success, of course, an incredibly low vacancy rate for rentals, extremely high housing costs, and there's no single determinant of homelessness, you know, with a higher correlation than high housing costs. So again, we're like every other successful community in America experiencing this problem. And so it's gotten really bad. And we are at that point that the birds were at in this wonderful story where we're saying we need a new way of doing things. And so, but imagine the homelessness response system like those birds and the very many types of birds. And imagine the jurisdictions, the city of Spokane, the county, the Spokane Valley, and then the other, I think, 11 incorporated areas within within the county of Spokane. And then imagine literally the 100 or so service providers out doing what they do. And then imagine medical providers and the mental health providers. The system, the homeless response system that's directly involved and indirectly involved is more complex than any system I dealt with at the city over the 18 years. I always thought the criminal justice system was the most complex because you'd get about 3 layers deep and people's eyes would start to cross with all the moving parts. The homelessness response system is far more complex. So just like those birds, you can imagine the disparate opinions, thoughts, ideas, ways of doing things, perspectives. There's subject matter experts that know a lot about it. There's people that are just angry about it. But we have a couple of things drawing us together. One of the most powerful things drawing us together and pulling us together is that it's, as Ben was talking about, it's far less expensive to house somebody and give them services than it is to have them on the streets. And that's really powerful because in Houston, they estimate about 5 times. They say it's somewhere around 90 to 100,000 to have somebody on the streets if you add up all the costs of having them there versus about 20,000 to give them housing and wraparound services. Not only that, that 20,000 for housing and wraparound services, a lot of that comes from the state and the feds. So it's not even our money. Whereas the 100,000, say in Houston's case, is all our money. It's coming out of our medical institutions, it's coming out of our emergency response systems, it's coming out of the businesses that are losing business, it comes from all of us. So we're the ones suffering. So you suddenly see this remarkable opportunity where financially, it makes total sense. When you talk to the people in Houston, you say, boy, we're not sure we can afford that. And they're like, you can't afford not to. and so that's a powerful statement on a financial level alone. And you know that appeals to a lot of people, just that financial part. And then the compassion part is huge. And you find out that the people that are mostly focused on the financial part, when you start to satisfy their concerns and perspective from a financial perspective, they start to show a lot of compassion. And then you see the people that are fundamentally focused on the compassionate side of homelessness, and you explain how you're going to address it from a compassion standpoint. They're more than willing to recognize the economic and financial aspects of homelessness, which are substantial. They affect our downtown, they affect the businesses downtown, and suddenly you have maybe this one issue in America today where left and right can come together and form a really powerful alliance to deal with the problem. But we are right now where the birds are deciding, to come together and fly to a new place. And so on Monday, I believe, the City Council and County will sign a joint statement moving in this direction of having a regional governance, a regional system where we all work together and we all collaborate. I think on Tuesday, the Valley will also sign. And we're reaching out to all the outlying communities also. I can't remember the last time those three jurisdictions came together with unanimity and said, we need to do this a certain way. Then we're going to spend 90 days talking about the details. So that's kind of like the birds in flight. And I think, I'm not even sure I'm pronouncing it right, Stephanie, is it the Hupua?
I had to look that
Hupu, the Hupu. Yeah, and so they're looking for the Samorg. We're looking for the Samorg now. What will that look like? And so we're going to spend 90 days talking about what the Samorg should look like. We'll talk about the legal aspects. What should the formation be? Should it be a nonprofit organization where we can all come together, or should it be a public development authority, or perhaps it's a contractual arrangement? Those kinds of details matter. And so we'll have a bunch of lawyers get together and talk about that. And we'll talk about, after that, we'll talk about the board of directors, because we don't want this to be political. We want to get the politics out of homelessness, but we need the help of the politicians, because as Ben said, we've got to handle building a lot of new homes, which involves land use policies, involves land itself. The City of Spokane owns over 50% of the real estate in the incorporated area, and a stunning statistic. But we have a lot of land that we can, as a city organization, can help out the homelessness situation, because we know we have to get costs down. And then we'll talk about sharing finances, and we'll talk about sharing data, and how do we weave ourselves together in a community response. Camp Hope is a case study in how we need to do things differently. Because you recall, we had Commerce over here saying one thing, and the administration of the city saying another thing. The sheriff's office saying something altogether different. Different competing timelines, different competing objectives, different competing tools. A regional organization would have handled that just like these birds. They would have landed, they would have joined together to have a community conversation about how to come together, make it work together, and move with unanimity, sharing data, sharing resources, and most of all, most important, having a common vision about how to approach things. And the one lesson I learned at the city in 18 years is that when you put everything together and everything's working together and you have clear information, money is never, ever the problem. So that question of, can we afford to address homelessness? We can absolutely afford to address homelessness in our community. We just have to really come up with this plan and move it forward, and that's exactly where we are. When they sign that joint statement next week, we begin the 90 days to come up with a very detailed plan that you'll all hear about, and I hope everybody can weigh in on, their support or questions or concerns, whatever it is, to make this thing come together and to work for the outcomes we're talking about.
Thank you so much. We're really grateful for all the work you guys have been doing. So we are now going to sing our final hymn.
So please rise as you're able to sing number 299, Make Channels for the Streams of Love. Make channels for the streams of love, where they may broadly run, and love as overflowing streams to fill them everyone. For we must share if we would keep the gift of less above. We cease to give, we cease to have, such is the law of love.
Kindness strengthens and deepens relationships. It is a bridge over troubled waters, a safe harbor in a storm, a gesture of welcome to a newcomer. Kindness is a balm that can heal the wounds of alienation and isolation. It is a gesture that can put the stranger at ease and disarm the enemy. Kindness nurtures deep connections because it is such a generous act. We don't need to question motives because kindness is always from the heart. Kindness is free. Sprinkle it everywhere. Amen, blessed be, salam alaikum, and shalom.